Well, thank you all so much for preparing these selections for today. For us to, well, it was your whole thing. You didn't actually even have to prepare a selection, which was wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the easy part. And thank you so much, Conrad, for that particular collection of selections. I think it's a wonderful sampling of the piece to get a real taste for it. So I asked you the question that we asked yesterday, which was in this continued discussion about our vocabulary for describing these pieces, and it's probably most apt to start with that difficult question where I ask those of you who, to describe the piece you are not producing or writing, and what words would you use to describe each other's pieces, and then you can go back to the language of your own piece.
To whom is that question?
Yeah.
I was going to say, Chris, Tony, you go first.
Sure. Eclectic, I would say, would be a word I would use. I think the use of many genres speaking together in a way that makes a lot of sense. I think that I would say eclectic. I would also say contemporary, which I think is a real strength. I think it's often hard to set something in the modern era with acoustic voices, and so I think it's successful in that aim, certainly.
It's going to sound like an insult, but it's a compliment. Which is to say, almost invisible, and I love that about it because I remember a journalist friend of mine said to me, he said that we work to be invisible, which is to say that they don't want their work, their talent, whatever, to be the focus of the audience. They want the information, and I think, in a sense, Conrad's very good at basically allowing us to focus on the drama and the narrative and the story, which is basically to say is that I was not focused on the music, I was focused on what was going to happen to these characters, which I'm guessing is what your goal was as a composer, and the writer for that matter.
I like the contemplative and meditative quality. Well, I'm not supposed to say what I like, I'm supposed to be describing. The piece has a contemplative and meditative quality. And it has an interesting and unusual balance between brute passion on the one hand and contemplation on the other. And the music reflects that very, very well.
Charles, Larry, do you want to throw anything in there?
It's very witty, and it also, I think, is very evocative of the time period. I think if I was describing this piece to another producer, and especially as a director, I would talk about some of the way that the storytelling is done in the third person, because I think that's specific to the piece and it's something you would want to bring out and helps to differentiate it from other narrative forms.
That's right. We talked about that quite a bit at the beginning, and I remember the moment, the sort of aha moment came when a bunch of us, Conrad, I think, first saw the Elevator Repair Services production of Gatz. You know, when they do the entire Great Gatsby, and they pass the narrative around just like that. And so Conrad sort of had that chance to grab that and take it into music.
Excellent. I don't know how many of you had a chance to read the stuff in the program beforehand, describing the origin for both of these pieces, but they both came out of really fantastic workshop environments. And I wanted to ask, as far as the texts for selecting to set them, and I know in the descriptor, Conrad, this is being a native San Franciscan and having that story be something that aligns with you. Did you get to choose that, or was that part of the offering in what you all were doing structurally in that workshop? And the same question for you two about the workshop that you were collaborating on. Larry, do you provide those texts, or do they bring them in as part of that project? So we'll start with Charles and Conrad.
Yeah, you can answer specifically, but we did find out after running the Composers and Voice series for about 3 or 4 years that it was very instructive to have an assignment. We set Walt Whitman, we had found texts, we had poetry of their choosing. So there was a mix that they had to do. And Conrad had already started this piece, I think, in your head, and maybe even in practice. I can't remember, but you no, okay. So this was your.
All I knew is that I was obsessed with the work, and that if we were going to do 5 arias in the course of the year, I wanted to do 5 arias out of that book. I hadn't seen GATS yet. I hadn't had my aha moment. I'd had 20 years of living with this novel, dreaming of making an opera out of it and not knowing how. And then during that year, in the course of making the arias, also the bingo moment came. This is how to do it.
So one of the structures of the American Opera Project's Compose on the Voice is they have to compose for 6 voice types during the course of the season when they're with us.
Well, they can talk about the specific story that they chose, because that was completely of their own doing within the framework of the assignment that I described earlier. Chris and Tony didn't know each other when they came into the program. This is as part of our program. It's a pretty intensive program. They have over 70 classes, over 200 hours of workshop and class instruction during the course of the season. So and they can say they were probably exhausted by the end of the process, and especially the writing of this particular project. The libretto gets done in about a month, and the score gets done in about a month. There's some, things that lead up to that as well. But during the course, they had an opportunity to collaborate with 3 other librettists or composers, and part of what we try to do is identify where there's collaborative chemistry, and see how that might blossom in a one-act project. Tony and Chris had written an amazing aria, Gesualdo aria, based on the character of the composer Gesualdo, and we thought that this would be a pairing. But after the pairing, it was up to them to run off with the material, so they're best to describe that process.
Okay.
Well, so Larry called me and said, I want you to work with Tony, and I'm like, okay, what do I like that Tony does? Which is to say, Tony does many things and does them well, but I wanted to think about something that I would connect with very closely, and also just what do I like in opera, and what do I think works really well in an operatic context. And the thing I loved about what Tony had done, which was totally of his own doing when he wrote that little Gesualdo aria, was to write it in verse, which made sense. It's historical, and I loved his verse, and I really love verse operas. Summer Night's Dream, The Britain, is one of my favorite operas of all time. And also what I loved about that opera is that it sort of dispenses with the why opera question very easily and quickly. It's sort of like, well, why not? It's a fairy tale. I mean, that sounds perfect to me. No one would ever ask you that question. Which is so then, and I also said to Tony, I think Tony actually said, do you want to do something mythological? And busted out as Edith Hamilton, and of course, so then and then of course the musical possibilities echo not unobvious,
right? And that's actually something I had wanted to do an Echo Narcissus piece at some point. I'd always wanted that because of this idea of as a librettist, or even thinking as a lyricist, because prior to the program I hadn't really thought of myself as a librettist. How do you deal with making a duet structure where one character can't ever speak of her own volition and can only repeat? And I just, love the idea of wrapping my brain around that. So we have this 3-character assignment, and I kind of stroked my chin when he said, and it was so wonderful to have him be so sort of specific. I really would love to write a piece with you in verse, and I really would love something that's kind of that's whimsical and magical.
Yeah.
And I said, I love those 2 things. How about this? And we set off.
And off you went.
Yeah.
For Charles and for Larry, as the initial producer for this, and again, this is a unique. We were actually having this question walking to dinner last night, and someone said to me, I'm not sure I'm completely clear on the difference between AOP and ALT. And yet you both have these programs that foster this kind of training for composers, the idea that they specifically write for 6 voices, and the idea that there's this intensive collaboration. When you said a little bit ago, Larry, that Chris had also worked with 3, they each worked with 3 librettists, is that sort of a speed dating sort of cycle of figuring out who has chemistry, or is that mentoring from others?
We have the faculty. Our faculty is in the program book, but Corey Ellison, Mark Adamo, Anthony Davis, and Michael Corey really work with these different artists in different ways on different types of projects. The question of what's the difference between ALT and AOP comes up a lot, and I think we're very similar in some ways and different in others. We're complementary organizations. We have a lot of similar goals. I never want to say what AAOP is, so I can just speak to what ALT is. We consider ourselves a service organization that serves composers and librettists and serves the opera field. We do not produce currently. There is some talk of that down the line, but we do not do any sort of production season. And although we are co-producers in some of the projects that we have developed, but this program, in the first year of the program, is completely process-oriented. As I said that before, the end product is really not the goal. We're thrilled when something like All Wounds Bleed comes out of it, and there have been a number of very successful pieces out of it. But it's really about developing the skills in composers and librettists. And the reason I started the program was because I had identified an absence in the intensity and degree of mentorship for composers and librettists relative to what's out there for singers. There are other programs. AOP has a wonderful program, and there were others as well, but there was nothing truly full-time, and that's what we set out to do.
And then Charles, you're...
Well, I think we consider ourselves an opera company in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. So the fact that we invite 6 composer fellows, and this year we added a couple of librettists into our home, they get the benefits of watching a small opera company for a year. So that's a little different right there. We do produce, often the Composer and Voice program is the generator of the projects that we produce. Darkling in 2006 had a nice run in New York, and now there's a CD out. Paul's Case, another one that came out of the Composer Voice group, is going to be produced this year in New York, or next season, 2013. So we do try to take things when the gods shine upon us and everything, and we can get the funding. We'll do a full production. The artistic director, Steve Osgood, could probably speak more to the process, like Larry leads. I do not lead the Composer Voice program. I'm in background trying to find the money. But the point is that we do think that the skills that we are trying to foster are the ones to write for the voice. So the fact that you had to circulate through 6 different voices in a season, and then were asked to do for multiple voices together at the end of the season, that was all very much in a continuum, right? You weren't feeling like we were forcing you to do something before you were ready, and you had a lot of feedback between the other composers and the singers while you were working as well, right? I mean, you're better to describe that.
I told Steve when he interviewed me for the program, he said, well, why would you want to be in this program? You've already written 4 operas. And I'm like, I feel like I've spent my career up to then writing against the operatic voice. I want to learn how to write for it. And he said, that's good, and that's what I spent the year doing.
Yeah, so.
Excellent, thank you. I would like to invite all of you, and based on the activities that many of you in the room enjoyed earlier this afternoon in learning a little bit about our critical response, and I will do my best to employ my newfound skills to help facilitate, which are really newfound, so run with me on this. Would you like to talk about these 2 pieces? What was meaningful? What struck you? What made a chord resonant in you about these? Darren.
I just found both of them had such craft, and yet the craft did not get in the way of the music or the drama. I thought I was completely engaged in both pieces. I loved them both. But at the heart of it, I was just so thankful to Larry and Charles because you could see what real mentorship can produce. And I thought that was really excellent.
Bill.
What I was struck by, I mean, first of all, I just another thanks to both Larry and Charles for what they're doing for the field. But what I was struck by both pieces is that in the operatic map, sometimes one can feel that the lyric voice is dead. In other words, and it was really gratifying both these pieces to feel and hear it be very much alive. And I think that's important because I think at the heart, for me anyway, it's got to hit you inside. And I found that both these pieces did it in their own unique ways, and I think we as producers owe gratitude to Larry and Charles and to keep that alive.
Greg.
I was blown away by both the libretti. I just thought that they were so ever present. Sometimes those librettos sort of like, those are the words. But both of them were so tight and directed and focused and just kept our attention the whole time. Not just the words, but the structure of the libretto. It never left what you intended to do, and they show 'em. They really show 'em.
Can I address that directly, just because I have to praise my collaborator here on that, because as was mentioned, I had 3 weeks to write the score.
4 weeks.
I wrote it in like 2 days. I had a very short amount of time to write that much music, and I have to say that one thing that totally saved me was Tony is also a composer and writes music and has a very strong sense of structure. So I was sort of like, oh, he's like written half the piece for me already. And so sort of like, once I developed my musical materials, it was very easy to adapt it to his libretto in a way where I felt like I was basically agreeing with the libretto. That sounds like it makes sense. But one thing that really saved me in the terms of like, what's the structure going to be? It's like, well, structure was pretty clearly laid out in the libretto. And that's very
But also, I mean, and we're going to talk about this tomorrow morning when Mark is here to do the libretto outlining session, is that this, Mark teaches a libretto and music outlining sort of methodology, which this piece was born from. And so that structure, before they started writing the libretto and before they started writing the score, they spent a lot of time just on the architectural structure, and I am actually going to distribute tomorrow the outline that they wrote of this libretto, which is basically a bullet point of just the dramatic actions. And you'll see how that lines up to what actually resulted in the piece. It's really quite fascinating.
Yeah, I thought it was great to see that acknowledged right now by the group, but also in the piece itself, that how the structure of the libretto that is such a crucial part of that particular piece, and how that is often neglected or not acknowledged or not present in some pieces that both the last 2 years it seems like. But in both pieces, I was struck just by the raw sensuality of the sound of the music and how it informed the drama. It was something that was pleasurable to listen to, very engaging.
Along with everything else that's been said, because I was blown away by both pieces, I liked all of your talent for the reveal or the surprise. Every once in a while, something would come along and it would just land just right, and that's not always the case. That's often not the case.
On a related note, and I say this as a former singer, is that sometimes with contemporary opera, one feels that composers are using only a small segment of what the human voice can do in an operatic way. And it was nice to sort of wallow in both the composers actually making full use of what the operatic person can do in a contemporary context, which you don't always get. And that was very, I like to sort of swimming in that. It was really, really nice.
But beyond that, a full range of vocal texture. Not just the full lyric singing which we all love, but from speech right on up through the whole texture range. Great.
Thanks for the pianissimo.
So I turn to the artists, which all of you are, but specifically for this, for Conrad and for Tony and Chris. Do you have a question you would like the audience to respond to about what they saw today, or thoughts you have about the piece in its current configuration that you wondered what the audience response is in the choices that you've made? Conrad, who's ready?
Yeah. I'm really curious what physical productions come to mind for the Golden Gate in people's minds. Really curious if there's something that pops into people's
I've given
heads.
a lot of thought to that because I've gotten the CD or the DVD and watched the other production, and there was a lot of pantomime going on, and I kept saying, this feels so much like a movie. This feels so, it's in so many places at once, and so there's this new scribe technology that has, it's projections, so I see it largely cinematically, and I always had, since I first became acquainted with the piece.
I guess that's how I've always been kind of visualizing it, yeah.
We did a very bare bones production where there were just stools,
Right.
and that's the one that is available on DVD.
Kurt.
Because the narrative is so split up between them, it's hard to go to a realistic type of production
Exactly.
for it. So somehow bridging that between realistic settings and the segmented storytelling component, I think, really plays into how you physicalize the production.
bridging that, I get it.
So this is
Roberta, go ahead.
You could take the singers and go to the different locations in San Francisco and film them, so they could be doing it while they're singing.
Do you, go ahead, Ben.
I just went in a completely different direction, and it seems to me that all one would need would be a marker as to where something's happening, and then you create the space in which the story is being told, rather than the space in which it's happening, because the direct address to the audience and the shifting back and forth between storyteller and character, I think is an important part of the piece. I don't know the rest of the piece, it's always about Ray, and it seems to me that focusing on the theatrical qualities rather than the cinematic qualities would highlight the uniqueness of the piece.
Ditto.
Tony, Chris,
You're looking at me like you.
do you guys have a question?
I mean, my biggest question would have been, did you understand it? And it felt like you did, so I kind of got that just from sitting next to you in the house. Maybe what companion myths might make an extra half-hour edition?
Or extra numbers.
Oh,
I like that.
You don't have to write that.
Greta, yeah.
The first part of the question where you said you're assuming that we did. There was just one little thing. I did not look at the program beforehand, so, and it's not on tape. So I did not understand at the very beginning that that guy was not.
Yeah.
It wasn't until the second time it came up, and I went, oh, is that, he's been playing two pieces, and I went, no, I get it. So.
Okay.
Other thoughts about companion pieces or thoughts in general about All Wounds Bleed? Roger. I'm sorry. Richard.
That's all right. It would be interesting to do the stealing of the arrow. Not to make it a total piece. I'm not talking about expanding it so that it's a whole story. But it might be interesting to do the stealing of the arrow from Cupid as the companion piece, which could be a duet between Cupid and Echo. It's an interesting idea. I mean, I wouldn't make it a first act, but it might be an interesting piece.
Any other thoughts, ideas from that? Roberta.
I just want to say that I thought that the presentation of both pieces, without any scenery or anything, the technique of the acting without going anywhere was beautiful. You know, very, very convincing. And my imagination was pretty clear about, my participation in it. I loved the way that was done.
One of the things that we asked for in Composers and Voice is that it is a vocal piano result. That is what we're aiming for. A lot of the pieces that we get through submission are not piano vocal, and we have to really work with the composer to get to a piano vocal state. But these are that's what we asked for. That's part of the prescription of what you're supposed to do, right?
It was something that I felt strongly about that as I was building this piece. I wanted to have a piano part that was just really beautiful idiomatic piano music. And thank you. And I wanted to put aside until later the orchestration question.
But it's cheating to bring drums into it.
What else am I going to do? That's what's in the concert. It's not the movement they refer to. And so the orchestration process has been really delicious because there's nothing in the piano part that stands for anything in the orchestra. It's been like totally rethink the sound, completely fresh.
So it's not a piano concerto with an orchestral accompaniment?
No, there's a piano that goes thunk sometimes and goes sometimes, but absolutely not. No, there's some samples of the orchestration out there you can listen to. It's been a wonderful adventure with readings of the orchestration and everything we've been able to.
Yeah, it's also amazing. Without a producer, we've kind of been saying, hold off on the orchestration, hold off.
Yeah.
You couldn't hold off.
Yeah.
But
I had to do it.
That on button again.
Oh, man.
Chris, you wanted to add something to this?
Did I? Piano vocal thing is a very interesting thing because I remember coming to opera being sort of like, piano vocal scores. Because it's tricky. I have a fairly colorful palette as an orchestrator. But I think it's actually really a valuable process for me. It was because, in ALT it was sort of the same thing. And I think it's the same everywhere. I don't know of any kind. I saw this piano vocal score of like a Martin Feldman opera, and it was like the most preposterous sort of piano vocal score because it was just such a textural sort of pointillistic piece, and to like see like, okay, viola, but like, you know, the fact of the matter is that you know, like piano vocal scores are at the root of the operatic practice, as far as I'm aware. There's many more people here who know more about this than me, but to start with that, it's a fun challenge, and it's also, as Conrad was saying, you know, the trick is to sort of engage a little bit with the fact that you're writing a piano part, and you don't want to write this thing where it's like, dang, because it's not very fun to listen to, and a lot of, you know. That being said, it's also really fun to think about the piano as sort of playing a role in the work. And you know, in my piece, there's kind of a haze that happens throughout the whole thing, and the idea is to obviously lull you a little bit into a kind of otherworldly place, and then to think about how that's going to be dealt with orchestrationally is going to be really fun, because like I think it was Sibelius once said the difference between an orchestra and a piano is that it doesn't have a pedal. So to like think about how to recreate that effect.
That's the Sydney whole tone thing.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that'd be really fun to sort of have a haze of different orchestrational colors coded.
This has been wonderful to discuss and start to employ some of the things that we got to practice today. And we're at that time. I do want to allow you to not have the mad rush that we had last time. So thank you all, our presenters, again, for the conversation and the wonderful work this afternoon. For all of you who are joining us for dinner, the stage manager and me encourages you to go to the destination before you make your costume change. Please go down into the area near here. We've got some recommendations for some restaurants. The tickets are there because this is a private event for us. So just the performance starts at 7 for the Scarlet Ibis, and I look forward to seeing you all down there.